Now, in this video, I'm basically just going to give my general thoughts and first impressions of The Mandalorian. I'll start with some spoiler-free talk, mainly for those of you who are on the fence about ordering Disney Plus to watch it, or are thinking about finding other ways to watch it. And then I'll move into spoiler territory, and talk a little bit about the plot and or the big reveal, or the major Star Wars spoiler as it was called going into the episode. And yes, I will give you fair warning before tackling all that. Okay, so first of all here, or the first questions you probably want me to answer are, was it good and did I like it? Well, I'm happy to say that yes, it was really good and I highly enjoyed it. This series shows a tremendous amount of promise right out of the gate. And hats off to Dave Filoni who made his live-action directorial debut here. This certainly had the look and feel of Star Wars, or should I say original trilogy Star Wars, where everything feels gritty and lived in. This show immediately feels like it's taking place in a real galaxy full of aliens and strange, wondrous creatures, one that doesn't feel like a galaxy full of humans that happens to have a few other background aliens, like the sequel trilogy often feels like. The visuals and special effects are not on par with what you'd see in the films, but they're not far off either. There seemed to be a heavy use of practical effects here, which I appreciated. These weren't CGI aliens filling in the background, they were real people in real costumes. And when CGI was used, and don't get me wrong, there was quite a bit of it, it looked great. This wasn't the cheap, stick out like a sore thumb CGI that you'll sometimes find in similar natured shows. This was again near movie quality. As for the Mandalorian himself, the character I mean, thus far, he's pretty much exactly what I think most of us hoped and expected he'd be. He's a man of few words, and certainly a badass who can take care of business, but he's not Superman. Yes, he does some real cool and impressive things in the first episode, but they're balanced with a couple of humbling moments as well. Overall, I'm already far more interested in this character than I am in other characters we've gotten in Star Wars as of late. There was also plenty of action right in this first episode, and it looked damn good. There was a bit of humor in here as well, and it was subtle and on point, not in your face or slapstick or anything like that. The soundtrack was fine, I suppose. I watched it twice right away this morning when the app went live at 5 a.m., and there was really only one thing that stuck out to me, and that was this little almost Western sounding piece when we first saw The Mandalorian, what I'm guessing and hoping is kind of his theme. Perhaps one of the best parts of the show is you really feel like you're being thrown right into Star Wars. There's already a heavy amount of lore, especially surprise surprise Mandalorian lore, being thrown at you in this first episode, which if you're familiar with Star Wars you'll likely more or less understand right out of the box. But if you're more of a casual fan or just someone who knows next to nothing and decides to watch this, it's not presented in a way that's utterly confusing or will turn you off. Instead, it's intriguing and will no doubt get explained in more detail as time goes on. In other words, what Jon Favreau, the showrunner, said not long ago about wanting to put stuff in there to honor fans of Star Wars is 100% true. This was a Star Wars show first and foremost, but again, I don't feel like it'd be too much for the average person to also immediately get into and enjoy. Yes, there were a ton of Easter eggs in there, and I'm sure by the end of the day someone will have a video of 1,000,001 things you missed in the first episode of The Mandalorian, and I'll let someone else do that, that's not my thing. But anyway, they were so subtle or in the background that if you missed them, you weren't actually missing anything. But if you noticed them, like a reference to Life Day from the holiday special, you certainly appreciated them. All in all here, to kind of sum up before I move into some spoilers, this was excellent. You can just tell or sense it was made by people who really love Star Wars and know the ins and outs of it. And I know it's only the first episode, but if you were on the fence about getting Disney Plus, I really don't think this show is going to disappoint you, especially if you were a fan of Rogue One. Because it has a very similar feel or vibe to it. This is, again, a more gritty and, for a lack of a better way of putting it, more down-to-earth version of Star Wars. Though again, like Rogue One, I don't think they're going to completely shy away from mentioning or in some fashion incorporating the Force. But for the most part, it's always going to be this very distant and mystical thing that is just part of the universe, that exists in the background or naturally, if you will. Sure, we may meet a Force-sensitive being or two along the way, but that aspect of Star Wars will never be the main focus of the show. Okay, let's now get into some spoilers, and I'll give you a moment or two if you haven't seen the show yet and want to click away and don't want anything ruined. Okay, so the first thing we have to talk about is the big reveal, or what was being called a major spoiler going into this episode, which is that the Mandalorian was sent to recover a young, relatively speaking, member of Yoda's species. And I don't really know I'd call that a spoiler, unless we were supposed to be under the assumption that Yoda and Yaddle before him were the last members of the species. Which is certainly possible, I suppose. I mean, we don't really know anything about them, though we've always just guessed that, for whatever reason, Yoda's species was just naturally strong with the Force, which seems to be all but confirmed if the remnants of the Empire want to get their hands on him for experimentation. And I'm already wondering if this is something George Lucas himself gave them some info or background on. This just feels like one of those things you'd really want his input on. And it's hard to imagine that Dave Filoni, of all people, would decide to create lore for Yoda's species without the blessing of Lucas. I also can't help but wonder if this is going to, in some way, shape, or form, have something to do with bringing Palpatine back in Episode 9. Or maybe it's Snoke who wants to get his hands on this child, or maybe it's neither one. Though we have been told this show will explore the origins of the First Order, so it's possible. And maybe the remnants of the Empire, or those still loyal to Palpatine, are looking for this child because they think he can somehow be used to bring Palpatine back. Or maybe Palpatine didn't really die and he's personally looking for this child and sending his cronies out to get him. And we do know, thanks to the Clone Wars and Rebels, that Palpatine was seemingly always looking for Force-sensitive children, so perhaps this is all going to tie it together somehow. But honestly, I don't really think that's going to be the case, mainly because I was thinking the show would be a bit more standalone or that it wouldn't tie too directly into the movies. That it would be, at least at the start, mostly just about bounty hunting and then slowly but surely blend in more Mandalorians and their culture. Though right in this first episode we learn that the Mandalorian was a foundling and is very much still a part of his people or with them, which was a surprise to be sure, but a welcome one. I'd really thought he might be an outsider who slowly works his way back in, or was forced back in, but I'm fine with being wrong here. Nor did I think this show would get too heavy into Force users or Force lore, and I still don't think that will be the case despite what we saw in the first episode here. I could see this whole thing with the Yoda baby, if I can call it that, being something that gets wrapped up in a few episodes and then the show just kind of moves on from it. That this was a way to do something big right at the start that would get people talking. That the Mandalorian, given his past, will take the child to safety somewhere and that will be that. Though he'll anger the remnants of the Empire in the process and set up future conflicts there. I kind of figure that whatever ultimately happens to the Yoda baby can and will be wrapped up down the road elsewhere, and maybe at the same time they can finally talk about that Force tree Luke rescued in the Shattered Empire comic series years ago. And speaking of Luke, maybe the baby Yoda finds his way to him eventually, and maybe that baby is actually the child of Yoda and Yaddle. Who the hell knows at this point what and where they're going to take this story. All we do know is that the remnants of the Empire know about his existence, or her existence, and that they want to experiment on him, I'm assuming. And that someone else, whoever hired IG-11, just wants the baby dead. There then wasn't much else revealed in this first episode, other than the fact that, again, the Mandalorian is a foundling, or that he was, as the name implies, found and brought into their culture and is still very much a part of it. We also saw that his homeworld was destroyed during the Clone Wars, which is bad for him, but awesome for us prequel and Clone Wars fans to see that time period being shown, and that the war will be a big impact on whoever our main character is. Which then means the show could really be the perfect blend of original trilogy, prequel trilogy, and sequel trilogy if done right. And though I know a lot of you out there don't enjoy the sequel trilogy era, and I for one am not a huge fan of it either, I'm always going to be open to them being able to do something interesting with it and to fix it up a little bit. Not saying anything ever would or could change my view on the movies or what was done with the story or the characters, but as a fan of Star Wars, I'm not against guys like Filoni and Favreau coming in and doing some remodeling or reframing of it. And I do think there's a real chance to explain and explore a lot of sequel trilogy things here, though at the same time, I don't want the show to focus on the origins of the First Order or anything like that. I want a deeper look at both the world of bounty hunting and Mandalorian culture at the start, before, as the seasons go on, it spirals into something much larger. I really think and hope this show is going to turn the Mandalorians back into a powerful and intimidating faction within the Star Wars galaxy. So again, overall here, I really enjoyed what I saw, and I'm very eager for more with the next episode dropping this coming Friday. Again, this felt like Star Wars to me, and I'm very curious to see what direction this show will ultimately take, and how will it do and be received. I don't want to get too bold with predictions, anything, especially after just one episode, but shows like this really could be, and maybe should be, the future of Star Wars. Yes, I love Star Wars movies, and I don't want them to ever stop making them as long as they can be good, But one of the issues I have with the sequel trilogy was a reluctance to get into the lore or to really break new ground or tell a story that had true depth to it. And this was mainly done because the movies, of course, have limited time to tell their story, and they're made to be accessible to all, even someone who has never seen a Star Wars movie before, which kind of makes the films feel like they don't trust the audience to be able to follow a story with any sort of complexity or reliance on what came before, which in turn makes the sequel trilogy, to some, feel separate from the whole, or like watered down, retold Star Wars. The Mandalorian, though, takes a quick, unapologetic dive right into the lore of Star Wars and throws you right into the middle of things, which makes it feel like it truly belongs in this universe and will be an expansion of it, not a retread of it. It trusts its audience to either know or understand much of the lore already, or that they'll be able to understand it as time goes on, as the show gradually explains more and more of it. Basically, I think this is the Star Wars a lot of us fans have been looking for. I think this show is very much the future of the franchise. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you thought of the first episode of The Mandalorian. Was it everything you were hoping for and more, or was it a disappointment? Let me know in the comments below, and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.